Well, there is an outstanding question. How long will it take before machines reach a level of radical superintelligence once they have some form of general reasoning capability that is comparable to that of humans? Or will this transition be gradual, slow, or just thrown out? Or will it come on quickly and violently? The kinetics of the transition to superintelligence are examined in this video as a function of optimization and system recalcitrance. We take into account what is known or what can be inferred from the behavior of these two variables in the vicinity of human-level general intelligence. One is left to wonder how quickly this conquest will occur given that machines will eventually vastly surpass biology in terms of general intelligence, but that machine cognition is currently vastly, say, more limited than human cognition. We need to make a clear distinction between this question and the one we discussed in my first video about how close we are to creating a machine with general intelligence on equal level with humans. Here, the question is rather how long will it take for a machine to become radically superintelligent if and when such a device is created? And note that one might believe that it will take a while for machines to reach a level of intelligence comparable to that of humans, or one might be unsure of when that will happen and still hold the firm belief that once it does, the ascent into strong superintelligence will happen very quickly. Even though doing so requires temporarily ignoring some qualifications and complicating details, it can be beneficial to think about these issues schematically. Let's take a look at a diagram created by Dr. Nick Bostrom that shows how intellectual capacity evolves over time for the most sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. And here's the diagram. A horizontal line labeled human baseline represents the effective intellectual capabilities of a representative human adult with access to the information sources and technological aids currently available in developed countries. At present, the most advanced AI system is far below the human baseline on any reasonable metric of general intellectual ability. At some point in future, a machine might reach approximate parity with this human baseline. This would mark the onset of the takeoff. The capabilities of the system continue to grow, and at some later point, the system reaches parity with the combined intellectual capability of all of humanity, what we may call the civilization baseline. Eventually, if the system's abilities continue to grow, it attains strong superintelligence, a level of intelligence vastly greater than contemporary humanity's combined intellectual wherewithal. The attainment of strong superintelligence marks the completion of the takeoff, though the system might continue to gain in capacity thereafter. Sometime during the takeoff phase, the system may pass a landmark which we can call the crossover, a point beyond which the system's further improvement is mainly driven by the system's own actions rather than by work performed upon it by others. With this image in mind, we can categorize transition scenarios into three groups based on their steepness or whether they represent a slow, fast, or moderate takeoff. These scenarios show how systems advance from human-level intelligence to superintelligence. The first one is slow takeoff. A slow takeoff is one that happens over a considerable amount of time, like decades or even centuries. Situations where that slow takeoff provide excellent opportunities for human political systems to adjust and react. It's possible to sequentially test and try various strategies. It is possible to train and accredit new experts. Groups that feel they are being disadvantaged by current developments may mobilize grassroots campaigns. Such systems could be created and implemented if it appears that new types of secure infrastructure or widespread surveillance of AI researches are required. Nations worried about a race to develop artificial intelligence would have time to try and negotiate agreements and create enforcement measures. Since better solutions would gradually become apparent in the light of the dawning era, the majority of the preparations made prior to the slow takeoff will be rendered obsolete. And the second one would be fast takeoff. A quick takeoff happens over a brief time span, like a few minutes, hours, or days, maybe weeks. Fast takeoff situations give people very little time to think. Before anything out of the ordinary is even noticed, the game is already over. The fate of humanity in fast takeoff scenario largely depends on the preparations made beforehand. Some basic human actions, comparing to flicking open the nuclear suitcase, might be possible at the slowest end of the fast takeoff scenario range, but any such action would either be elementary or have been planned and pre-programmed in advance. Well, and the last one is moderate takeoff. A moderate takeoff is one that takes place over a middle ground temporal period, like a few months or few years. Moderate takeoff scenarios give humans some opportunity to react, but little opportunity to analyze the situation, test various strategies, or resolve challenging coordination issues. New systems, like such as political systems, surveillance regimes, or computer or network security protocols, cannot be developed or deployed in time, but existing systems can be used to address the new challenge. During a slow takeoff, there would be plenty of time for the news to get out. In a moderate takeoff, it is possible that developments will be kept secret as they unfold. Knowledge might be restricted to a small group of insiders, as in a covert state-sponsored military research program. Commercial projects, for example, or small academic teams and 9 hackers in a basement outfits might also be clandestine. So if the prospect of an intelligent explosion were on the radar of the state intelligence agencies as a national security priority, then the most promising private projects would seem to have a good chance of being under surveillance. The host state would then have the option of nationalizing or shutting down any project that shows signs of commencing takeoff. Fast takeoffs would happen so quickly that there would not be much time for word to get out or for anybody to mount a meaningful reaction if it did. But an outsider might intervene before the onset of the takeoff if they believe the particular project to be closing in on success. Moderate takeoff scenarios could lead to geopolitical, social, and economical turbulence as individuals and groups jockey to position themselves to gain from the unfolding transformation. Such upheaval, should it occur, might impede efforts to orchestrate a well-composed response. And alternatively, it might enable solutions more radical than calmer circumstances will permit. For example, in a moderate takeoff scenario where cheap and capable emulations or other digital mines gradually flood labor markets and markets over a period of years, one could imagine mass project protests by laid-off workers pressuring governments to increase employment benefits or institute a living wage guarantee to all human citizens, or just to levy special taxes or impose minimum wage requirements on employers who use emulation workers. And in order for any relief derived from such policies to be more than fleeting, support for them would somehow have to be cemented into permanent power structures. Similar issues can arise if the takeoff is slow rather than moderate, but this equilibrium and rapid change in moderate scenarios may present special opportunities for small groups to wield disproportionate influence. It might appear to some viewers that of these 3 types of scenarios, the slow takeoff is most probable. It sounds more impossible. The moderate takeoff is the less probable, and the fast takeoff is, I would say, utterly impossible. It could seem fanciful to suppose that the world could be radically transformed and humanity deposed from its position as apex cogitator over the course of an hour or 2 or 3 or 4. No change of such moment has ever occurred in human history, and its nearest parallels, the agricultural and industrial revolutions, played out over much more longer timescales. So the base rate for the kind of transition entailed by a fast or medium takeoff scenario, in terms of the speed and magnitude of the postulated change, is zero. It lacks precedent outside myth and religion. Nevertheless, this video will present some reasons for thinking that the slow transition scenario is improbable. If and when a takeoff occurs, I believe it will be explosive in the long run. To begin to analyze the question of how fast takeoff will be, we can conceive of the rate of increase in a system's intelligence as a function of two variables: the amount of optimization power and qualitative weighted design effort that is being applied to increase the system's intelligence and the responsiveness of the system to the application of a given amount of such optimization power. We might term the inverse of responsiveness recalcitrance, and we can write rate of change in intelligence equals to optimization power divided by recalcitrance. Pending some specification of how to quantify intelligence, design effort, and recalcitrance, this expression is merely qualitative, but we can at least observe that the system's intelligence will increase rapidly if either a lot of scaled effort is applied to the task of increasing its intelligence, and the system's intelligence is not too hard to increase, or there is a non-trivial design effort and the system's recalcitrance is low or just was. If we know how much design effort is going into improving a particular system and the rate of improvement this effort produces, we could calculate the system's recalcitrance. And further, we can observe that the amount of optimization power devoted to improving some systems' performance varies between systems and over time. A system's recalcitrance might also vary depending on how much the system has already been optimized. Often, the easiest improvements are made first, leading to diminishing returns as how hanging fruits are depleted. However, there can also be improvements that make further improvements easier, leading to improvement cascades. The process of solving a jigsaw puzzle starts out simple. It is easy to find the corners and the edges. The recalcitrance goes up as subsequent pieces are harder to fit, but as the puzzle nears completion, the search space collapses and the process gets easier again. Well, to proceed in this part, we must therefore analyze how recalcitrance and optimization power might vary in the critical time periods during the takeoff. Let's start with recalcitrance. The outlook in this case depends on the kind of system being taken into account. To be thorough, we first take a quick look at the resistance that would be found along superintelligent achieving paths past the world of sophisticated machine intelligence. Our research indicates that resistance along those paths seems to be fairly high. Once that is done, we will move on the main argument, which is that machine intelligence is involved in the takeoff. In this case, we discovered that the resistance at the crucial moment appears to be low. The benefits of improving public health and diet and cognition are rapidly diminishing. Eliminating severe nutritional deficiencies will result in significant gains, and all but the poorest nations have already accomplished this. By increasing a diet that is already sufficient, only weight is gained. Education is likely now also affected by diminishing returns. Also still significant, the percentage of talented people without access to high-quality education is decreasing. For example, pharmacological enhancers might deliver some cognitive gains over the coming decades or centuries, But after the easiest fixes have been accomplished, perhaps sustainable increases in mental energy or ability to concentrate, along with better control over the rate of long-term memory consolidation, subsequent gains will be increasingly hard to come by. Unlike diet and public health approaches, however, improving cognition through smart drugs might get easier before it gets harder. The field of neuropharmacology still lacks much of the basic knowledge that will be needed to complementally intervene in a healthy brain. The neglect of enhancement medicine as a legitimate area of research may be partially to blame for this current backwardness. If neuroscience and pharmacology continue to progress for a while longer without focusing on cognitive enhancement, there will be some relatively easy gains to be had when at least the development of nootropics becomes a serious priority. Genetic cognitive enhancement has a U-shaped recalcitrance profile similar to that of nootropics, but with larger potential gains. Recalcitrance starts out high, while the only available method is selective breeding sustained over many generations, something that is obviously difficult to accomplish on a globally significant scale. Genetic enhancement will get easier as technology is developed for cheap and effective genetic testing and selection. These new techniques will make it possible to tap the pool of existing human genetic variation for intelligence in enhancing alleles. As the best existing alleles get incorporated, the genetic enhancement packages, but further gains will get harder to come by. The need for more innovative approaches to genetic modification may then increase that recalcitrance. There are limits to how quickly things can progress along the genetic enhancement path, most notably the fact that germline interventions are subject to an inevitable maturational lag. And this strongly counteracts the possibility of a fast or moderate takeoff. The embryo selection, for example, can only be applied in the context of in vitro fertilization, will slow its rate of adoption, and it's another limiting factor. The recalcitrance along the brain-computer path seems initially very high. In the unlikely event that it somehow becomes easy to insert brain implants and to achieve high-level functional integration with the cortex, recalcitrance might plummet. And in the long run, the difficulty of making progress along this path will be similar to that involved in improving emulations or AIs, since the bulk of the brain computer systems intelligence will eventually reside in the computer path. The recalcitrance for making networks and organizations in general more efficient is high. A vast amount of effort is going into overcoming this recalcitrance, and the result is an annual improvement of humanity's total capacity by perhaps no more than a couple of percent. Furthermore, shifts in internal and external environment mean that organizations, even if efficient at one time, soon become ill-adapted to their new circumstances. The ongoing reform effort is thus required even just to prevent deterioration. A step change in the rate of gain in average organizational efficiency is perhaps conceivable, but it is hard to see how even the most radical scenario of this kind of could produce anything faster than a slow takeoff, since organizations operated by humans are confined to work on human timescales. The internet continues to be an exciting frontier with many opportunities for enhancing collective intelligence. With a recalcitrance that seems at the moment to be in the moderate range, progress is somewhat swift, but a lot of effort is going into making this progress happen. It may be expected to increase as low-hanging fruits are depleted. Well, it is difficult to estimate how difficult it will be to move toward whole brain emulation. However, we can already identify a key future achievement: the successful imitation of an insect brain. The achievement of that milestone would provide a good indication of the difficulty of scaling up the technology to human world brain emulation because it would provide a clear view of much of the terrain ahead. It's a very important part because we can make it real in the near future. And in contrast, the development of artificial intelligence may not have any clear turning points or early warning signs. It's entirely possible that the search for artificial intelligence will initially seem to be lost in a dense jungle before an unexpected discovery shows the finish line to be only a few short steps away in a clearing. Remember the difference between these two inquiries. How challenging is it to develop cognitive abilities that are roughly human level? And how difficult is it to advance to superhuman levels from there? The first query is mostly important for estimating how much time will pass before takeoff. The second question is crucial for determining the takeoff's shape, which is what we are trying to do here. Also, it might be tempting to assume that the transition from a human to a superhuman level must be the more difficult one because it occurs at a higher altitude and requires the addition of capacity to a system that is already quite capable. This will be a very dangerous assumption. It is quite possible that recalcitrance falls when a machine reaches human parity. Consider first whole brain emulation. The difficulties involved in creating the first human emulation are of a quite different kind from those involved in enhancing the existing emulation. Creating the first emulation involves huge technological challenges. For example, particularly in regard to developing the requisite scanning and image interpretation capabilities. This step might also require considerable amounts of physical capital, investment, and industrial scale machine park with hundreds of high throughput scanning machines is not implausible. By contrast, enhancing the quality of an existing emulation involves tweaking algorithms and data structures, essentially a software problem, and one that could turn out to be much easier than perfecting the imaging technology needed to create that original template. Programmers, for example, could easily experiment with tricks like increasing the neuron count in different cortical areas to see how it affects performance in human brain. They also could work on code optimization and on finding simpler computational models that preserve the essential functionality of individuals' neurons or small networks of neurons. And if the last technological prerequisite to fall into place is either scanning or translation, with computer power being relatively abundant, then not much attention might have been given during the development phase, and easy opportunities for computational efficiency saving might be available. And another way to improve the code base once the first emulation has been produced is to scan additional brains with different or superior skills and talents. Productivity growth would also occur as a consequences of adapting organizational structures and workflows to the unique attributes of digital minds. And since there is no precedent in the human economy of a worker who can be literally copied, reset, run at different speeds, and so forth, managers of the first emulation cohort will find plenty of room for innovation in managerial practices. And after initially plummeting when human whole brain emulation becomes possible, recalcitrance may rise again. Sooner or later, the most glaring implementational inefficiencies will have been optimized away. The most promising algorithmic variations will have been tested, and the easiest opportunities for organizational innovation will have been exploited. The expanded no the template library will have broadened it so that acquiring more brain scans will add little benefit over working with existing templates. Since a template can be multiplied, each copy can be individually trained in a different field, and this can be done at electronic speed. It might be that the number of brains that will need to be scanned in order to capture most of the potential economic gains is small. Possibly a single brain would suffice. And another potential cause of escalating recalcitrance is the possibility that emulations or their biological supporters will organize to support regulations restricting the use of emulation workers, limiting emulation copying, prohibiting certain kinds of experimentation, which with digital minds is instituting workers' rights and the minimum wage for emulations, and so on. And it's equally possible that, that political developments will go into opposite direction, contributing to a fall in recalcitrance. And this might happen if initial restraint in the use of emulation labor gives way to unfettered exploitation as competition heats up and the economic and strategic costs of occupying the moral high ground become clear. As for artificial intelligence, the difficulty of lifting a system from human level to superhuman intelligence, superintelligence by means of algorithmic improvements depends on the attributes of the particular system. Different architectures might have very different recalcitrance. And in some situations, recalcitrance will be extremely low. For instance, if human-level AI is delayed because one key inside long elusive programmers, then when the final breakthrough occurs, the AI might leapfrog from below to radically above human level without even touching the intermediary ranks. Another situation in which recalcitrance could turn out to be extremely low is that of an AI system that can achieve intelligent capability via two different modes of processing. To illustrate this possibility, suppose an AI is composed of two subsystems, one processing domain-specific problem-solving techniques and the other processing general-purpose reasoning ability. It could then be the case that while the second subsystem remains below a certain capacity threshold, and it contributes nothing to the system's overall performance because the solutions at the the solutions they generates are always interior to those generated by the domain-specific subsystems. Suppose now that small amount of optimization power is applied to the general purpose subsystem and that this produces a brisk rise in the capacity of that subsystem. At first, we observe no increase in the overall system's performance, indicating that recalcitrance is high. Then, once the capacity of the general purpose subsystem crosses the threshold where its solutions start to beat those of domain-specific subsystem, the overall system's performance suddenly begins to improve at the same brisk pace as the general purpose subsystem, even as the amount of optimization power applied stays constant. The system's recalcitrance has plummeted. And it is also possible that our natural tendency to view intelligence from an anthropocentric perspective will lead us to underestimate improvements in subhuman systems and thus to overestimate recalcitrance. For example, Eliezer Yudkowsky, an AI theorist who has written extensively on the future of machine intelligence, puts the point as follows. Now I'm going to share it with you. AI might make an apparently sharp jump in intelligence purely as the result of anthropomorphism, the human tendency to think of village idiot and Einstein as the extreme ends of the intelligence scale. instead of nearly indistinguishable points on the scale of minds in general. Everything dumber than a dumb human may appear to us as a simply dumb. One imagines that AI arrow creeping steadily up the scale of intelligence, moving past mice and chimpanzees, with AI still remaining dumb because AIs cannot speak fluent language or write science papers. And then the AI arrow crosses the tiny gap from infra-idiot to ultra-Einstein in the course of 1 month or some similarly short period. As a result of these various factors, it is challenging to predict how challenging it will be to make algorithmic advancements in the first AI that achieves a level of general intelligence that is comparable to that of a human being. At least a few scenarios are conceivable where algorithm recalcitrance is minimal. However, even if algorithm recalcitrance is extremely high, this wouldn't preclude the question of AI's overall recalcitrance from being low, because methods other than enhancing the system's algorithms may make it simple to increase its intelligence. Hardware and content are two additional aspects that can be improved. Consider content upgrades first. The components of a system software assets that do not form its primary algorithmic architecture are referred to here as the system's content databases of stored perceptions, skill libraries, and inventories of declarative knowledge are a few examples of content. And the distinction between algorithmic architecture and content is very hazy for many different kinds of systems, but it will still serve as a crude way to paint to one potential significant source of capability gains in a machine intelligence. A different way to the same thing is to say that a system's capacity for intellectual problem solving can be improved not only by making it smarter, but also by expanding what it knows. And thinking about a modern AI system like TextRunner or Watson from IBM, for example, these systems can derive specific semantic data from text analysis. These systems can extract a sizable amount of information from natural language and use that information to make straightforward inferences and provide answers, of course, but they cannot comprehend what they read in the same way or to the same degree as a human can. They can also gain knowledge from experience, expanding their conceptual representations as they came across new applications of the concept. They are made to be quick and scalable, and to operate for a large portion of the time is unsupervised mode. For example, TextRunner utilizes a corpus of 500 million web pages. And now imagine a remote descendant of such a system that has acquired ability to read with as much understanding as a human 10-year-old, but with a reading speed similar to that of TextRunner. So we are imagining a system that thinks much faster and has much better memory than a human adult, but knows much less. And perhaps the net effect of this is that the system is roughly human equivalent in its general problem-solving ability. But its content recalcitrance is very low. I mean, low enough to precipitate a takeoff. Within a few weeks, the system has read and mastered all the content contained in the Library of Congress. Now the system knows much more than any human being and thinks vastly faster, and it has become weakly super intelligent. A system might thus greatly boost its effective intellectual capability by absorbing pre-produced content accumulated through centuries of human science and civilization. For example, by reading through the internet, it's just one simple example. If an AI reaches human level without previously having had access to that material or without having been able to digest it, then the AI's overall recalcitrance will be low, even it is hard to improve its algorithmic architecture. Content recalcitrance is a relevant concept for emulations too. High-speed emulations has an advantage not only because it can complete the same tasks as biological humans more quickly, but also because it can accumulate more timely content, such as task-relevant skills and expertise. And in order to tap the full potential of fast content accumulation, however, a system needs to have a correspondingly larger memory capacity. There is little point in reading an entire library if you have forgotten all about the artwork by the time you get to Abalone. While an AI system is likely to have adequate memory capacity, emulations would inherit some of the capacity limitations of their human templates. They may therefore need architectural enhancements in order to become capable of unbounded learning. So far, we have considered the recalcitrance of architecture and of content. That is, how difficult it would be to improve the software of a machine intelligence that has reached human parity. Now let us look at a third way of boosting the performance of machine intelligence, that is improving its hardware. What would be the recalcitrance for hardware-driven improvements? Starting with intelligent software, one can amplify collective intelligence simply by using additional computers to run more instances of the program. One could also amplify speed intelligence by moving the program to faster computers. And depending on the degree to which the program lends itself to parallelization, speed intelligence could also be amplified by running the program on more processors. This is likely to be feasible for emulations, which have a highly parallelized architecture, but the many AI programs too have important subroutines that can benefit from massive parallelization. Amplifying quality intelligence by increasing computing power might also be possible, but that case is less straightforward, I will say. The recalcitrance for amplifying collective or speed intelligence in a system with a human-level software is therefore likely to be low. The only difficulty involved is gaining access to additional computing power. There are several ways for a system to expand its hardware base, each relevant over a different time scale. In the short term, for instance, computing power should scale roughly linearly with funding. Twice the funding buys twice the number of computers, enabling twice as many instances of the software to be run simultaneously. And the emergence of cloud computing services gives a project the option to scale up its computational resources without even having to wait for new computers to be delivered and installed through concerns over secrecy might favor the use of in-house computers. Just how easy it will be to scale the systems by a given factor depends on how much computing power the initial systems use. A system that initially runs on a PC could be scaled by a factor of thousands for a mere $1 million. A program that runs on a supercomputer will be far more expensive to scale. In a slightly longer term, the cost of acquiring additional hardware may be driven up as a growing portion of the world's installed capacity is being used to run digital mines. For example, in a competitive market-based emulation scenario, the cost of running one additional copy of an emulation should rise to be roughly equal to the income generated by the marginal copy, as investors bid up the price for existing computer infrastructure to match the return they expect from their investment. And over somewhat longer time scale, the supply of computing power will grow as new capacity is installed. A demand spike will spur production in existing semiconductor foundries and simulate the construction of new plants. And above all, the rising wave of technology improvements will pour increasing volumes of computational power into the turbines of the thinking machines. Historically, the rate of improvement of computing technology has been described by the famous Moore's law, which is one of its variations states that computing power per dollar doubles every 18 months or so. Also, one cannot bank on this rate of improvement continuing up to the development of human-level machine intelligence. Yet, until fundamental physical limits are reached, there will remain room for advances in computational technology. There are those reasons to expect that hardware recalcitrance will not be very high. Purchasing more computing power for the system once it proves its mettle by attaining human level intelligence might easily add several orders of magnitude of computing power, like chip customization, might add 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. And other means of expanding the hardware base, such as building more factories and advancing the frontier of computing technology, take longer, normally several years, maybe decades. So this lag will be radically compressed once machine superintelligence revolution is manufacturing and technology development. And in summary, we can talk about the likelihood of a hardware overhang. When human level hardware is created, enough computing power may already be available to run vast numbers of copies at great speed. And software recalcitrance, as I discussed already, is harder to assess but might be even lower than hardware recalcitrance. In particular, there may be content overhang in the form of pre-made content, for example, the internet, that becomes available to a system once it reaches human parity. Algorithm overhang, pre-designed algorithm enhancements is also possible, but perhaps less likely. Software improvements might offer orders of magnitude of potential performance gains that could be fairly easily accessed once a digital mind attains human parity. And on top of the performance, that performance gains attainable by using more or better hardware. Having examined the question of recalcitrance, we must turn to the other half of our schematic equation, that is optimization power. To remind, rate of challenge in intelligence equals to optimization power divided by recalcitrance. As reflected in this schematic, a fast takeoff doesn't require that recalcitrance during the transition phase below. A fast takeoff could also result if recalcitrance is constant or even moderately increasing, provided the optimization power being applied to improving the system's performance grows sufficiently rapidly. And we will see there are good grounds for thinking that the applied optimization power will increase during the transition, at least in the absence of a deliberate measures to prevent this from happening. We can distinguish 2 phases. The first phase begins with the onset of the takeoff, when the system reaches the human baseline for individual intelligence. And as the system's capacity continues to increase, it might use some or all of that capability to improve itself. However, most of the optimization power applied to the system will come from outside the system, either from the work of programmers and engineers employed within the project, or from such work done by the rest of the world as can be appropriated and used by the project as it is now. If this phase drags out for any significant period of time, we can expect the amount of optimization power applied to the system to grow. Inputs both from inside the project and from the outside world are likely to increase as the promise of the chosen approach becomes manifest. Researchers may work harder, more researchers may be recruited, and more computing power may be purchased to expedite progress. But the increase could be especially dramatic if the development of human-level machine intelligence takes the world by surprise, in which case that the case what was previously a small research project might suddenly become the focus of intense research and development efforts around the world. And the second growth phase will begin if at some point the system has acquired so much capability that most of the optimization power exerted on it comes from the system itself. And this fundamentally changes the dynamic, because any increase in the system's capability now translates into a proportional increase in the amount of optimization power being applied to its further improvement. If recalcitrance remains constant, this feedback dynamic produces exponential growth. The doubling constant depends on the scenario, but might be extremely short, mere seconds in some scenarios, if growth is occurring at electronic speeds at the time of speed of light, and which might happen as a result of algorithmic improvements or the exploitation of an overhang of content or hardware. Growth that is driven by physical construction, such as the production of new computers or manufacturing equipment, would require a somewhat longer timescale. It is likely that the applied optimization power will increase during the transition, initially because humans try harder to improve a machine intelligence that is showing spectacular promise. Later, because the machine intelligence itself becomes capable of driving further progress at digital speeds, like speed of light. This would create a real possibility of a fast or medium takeoff, even if recalcitrance were constant or slightly increasing around the human baseline. Yet we saw in the previous video that there are factors that could lead to a big drop in recalcitrance around the human baseline level of capability. These factors include, for instance, the possibility of rapid hardware expansion once a working software mind has been attained, and the possibility of algorithmic improvements, the possibility of scanning additional brain wall emulation in case of wall brain emulation, that is, and the possibility of rapidly incorporating vast amounts of content by digesting the internet. This is in the case of artificial intelligence. These observations notwithstanding, the shape of the recalcitrance curve in the relevant region is not yet well characterized. In particular, it's unclear how difficult it will be to improve the software quality of human-level emulation or AI. The difficulty of expanding the hardware power available to a system is also not clear. Whereas today it will be relatively easy to increasing computational power available to a small project by spending thousands times more on computational power, or by waiting a few years for the price of computers to fall. It is possible that the first machine intelligence to reach the human baseline will result from a large project involving pricey supercomputers, which cannot be cheaply scaled, and the Moore's law will by then have expired. And for these reasons, also a fast or medium takeoff looks more likely. The possibility of a slow takeoff cannot be excluded.